Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Solana, and we're going to be discussing its Bitcoin valuation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. In a video a few months ago, we talked about Solana essentially following this exact pattern. And the pattern is essentially that it would eventually break below this higher low structure into the end of the year and then get a bounce in early 2025. Now, it looks like that's what's happened, right? It looks like it is broken down here and then broken back up. Now, the reason we talked about this was because this is exactly what ETH Bitcoin did once upon a time, right? It also had a higher low structure that was holding as support. It then broke down and then it broke up and it stayed up there for a while and then eventually it bled back down. This process here, though, took a long time, right? And I think that's the thing is a lot of people expect things to play out over, a single day or a week. But this was a multi-year process. I mean, you're talking about a top in December of 2021, a breakdown in May of 2022, a break back up in July of 2020 or June of 2022, July 2022, and then a slow bleed down. And now we're in 2025, right? So the reason I mentioned the Sol Bitcoin pattern was because it was looking eerily similar to the ETH Bitcoin pattern. And it goes beyond just this pattern here, right? The distribution phase that Sol Bitcoin had until it sort of broke down. It goes beyond that because you could also look at ETH's prior pattern and see that Sol Bitcoin continues to follow that as well. For instance, if you were to look at a price range here, this was a 90% drop followed by about a 500% rally. Then after that 90% drop, 500% rally, ETH Bitcoin had that higher low structure. It broke down, got a bounce, came back up, and then a slow bleed. And then if you look at Sol Bitcoin, you'll see the exact same thing, right? You had a 90% drop. And basically the same thing, right? 89.8%. ETH Bitcoin was 89.8%. I mean, it's literally the exact same thing, right? ETH Bitcoin did not go up as much as Sol Bitcoin did, though, in this phase, right? This here was a 573% move. ETH Bitcoin went up about 450% or so, about 450%. But the overall structure remains somewhat similar, right? Sort of a distribution area, distribution phase, a higher low structure that kept people entertained. A breakdown made people fearful. They get scared, they sell. A break back up, it's the same thing, right? If you try to, it's like the find the difference in the two pictures. It's the same thing. Could it evolve into something different? That's always a question you have to ask yourself, right? Could it evolve into something different? Absolutely, right? There's no guarantee that Sol Bitcoin has to follow the path that ETH Bitcoin has set. But in order for it to do something different, I think you would need to see Sol Bitcoin at least take out this high, right? If it can take out that high right here, then it would start to look a little different than ETH Bitcoin. ETH Bitcoin was not able to take out that high. You see, it was not able to. It got close, but it didn't actually take it out. And so because it did not take it out, it ended up just being a lower high. And it got a lot of people to FOMO back in up at 0.08. And I remember that because, I got bearish on ETH Bitcoin here back in 2022. It dropped. I felt like a genius, right? And then the market essentially ripped my face off because it came back up here. And it was a lower high, but it was not fun, dealing with the comments, the comment sections back then, when it seemed like it might go higher. So just be aware that this is a potential path. It doesn't have to play out. I'm not trying to say that it does. There are scenarios where alts will go to new cycle highs against Bitcoin. the one thing that Sol Bitcoin has going for it that ETH Bitcoin did not back then was that we're going into 2025, or we're already in 2025, and normally Bitcoin dominance goes down in 2025. The counterpoint, though, is that we're still in quantitative tightening, and the other point to make is that there's no guarantee that you get, a normal right translated cycle. Hopefully that's what you get, but there's no guarantee. And so we'll see what happens, with Sol Bitcoin. But if you're new to the cryptoverse, you're wondering how the Bitcoin pairs sort of, where do they play a role? How are they relevant? That's what I would look at. We talked a lot about Sol Bitcoin breaking down and then breaking back up in early 2025. In the short term, the bigger milestone that Sol Bitcoin needs to really clear is to close above this level here, right? Because this is kind of the higher low structure. Now remember, ETH Bitcoin was able to get back above that higher low structure, right? It was able to get back above it. It had a big move up, and it closed right around those levels, and then it continued to go up for another month or two after that. So again, it looks familiar. It's not exactly the same thing, but it looks familiar, right? I mean, one of the differences, I guess, is that when ETH Bitcoin broke down here, it actually swept that low, right? You can see it swept the low. Sol Bitcoin did not sweep that low. So it's not exactly the same. It's not exactly the same. And I want to be clear about that because, I can joke about it and say, fine, the difference in the two pictures, they're the same. They are in a lot of ways, but there are some subtle differences. That's important. It's important to recognize. So I would say the first thing for Sol Bitcoin would be to clear this area and not just have this be sort of a wick that it just gets back up there, puts in a lower high again. But if it can get past this and come up here, the main resistance level, the main area to get past is all the way up here at around 31,000 Satoshis. Okay? So I would argue if it can get past 31,000 sats, then you could argue it's deviating from what ETH Bitcoin did. But if it can't get past 31,000 sats, or if it can't durably close above this level around 24,000 sats, then it's already deviating. So just want to provide, sort of some brief commentary on Solana. Obviously, it had a big move up recently. Solana USD also got a big bounce here off of its 20-week SMA, right? 20-week SMA. And so this is going to be, an important level to watch here over the coming weeks. But I think the more interesting thing is the Bitcoin valuation, always, right? Always the Bitcoin valuation over the USD valuation, because that's what, that's the better way to look at the market over the long haul, right? Even when you look at like ETH Bitcoin, and I do think ETH Bitcoin will likely bounce this year. But even when you look at ETH Bitcoin, this is sort of the bigger narrative that you have to look at, right? Like that it hasn't actually put in a higher high in a long time. Will Sol Bitcoin do the same thing? Because you also have, if you look at ETH Bitcoin from here down to that high, it was about a 43% drop from this high to that high. And then if you look at Sol Bitcoin from this high to that high, about a 33% drop. But the point is that ETH Bitcoin hasn't taken out this high. Will Sol Bitcoin take out that one ever? That's the question. This is one of the, and again, every altcoin is different. There are a few that are able to, but the vast majority of them never do. And that's why over long in a period of time, most people just become Bitcoin maxis, because they recognize that, 99.99% of the altcoin market eventually succumbs to the same fate. There's always a few that fight that narrative. It's important to remember that, right? There's always exceptions to the rule. Doesn't mean the rule is wrong. It just means that the rule is, generally correct, but there are a few exceptions to consider. But anyways, that'll wrap it up. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on ITC Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.